verses for each day of the. Okay, I think I got enough for everybody. Get you all. Hey, how y'all doing? Would y'all like one of these? Sweet. Someone's bound to get extra if I'm just one. If you have, we got plenty if anyone wants extra. No one wants to share. Now, this is a good little thing. I got it from one of my professors at Faulkner, and it kind of helps put that final week of the life of Christ just in order for you. I'm going to scoot this. Laura, I'm scooting this forward. I feel awkward standing this far back. We're going to continue our study over the life of Christ today, and we're going to find ourselves in Matthew 23 this evening. And Jesus has kind of, I guess you could say, ramped up his rhetoric or his wording at this point. He is now the scribes, the Pharisees, and all them religious leaders have been questioning him over numerous things at this point, and Jesus has finally started to go back at him a little bit, I guess you could say. And so we've made it to the woes right there in Matthew 23, and we've made it a couple of the way through. But I'm going to go ahead and just reread kind of the first couple that we've spoke about. So starting in verse 1 of Matthew 23, it says this. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their borders enlarge in their garments. They love the best places at feast, the best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplace, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you all are brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow others, or nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for pretense make a long prayer. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. This is essentially what we covered for the most part last week. And so Jesus, once again, is kind of repeating some of these things, and it's something that he's repeated over and over and over again, but it's stop making yourself to be this high when you need to be put in proper perspective, right? Stop trying to put everyone else below you and you ruling over them. Put things in proper perspective. Be a servant as Christ has come to be a servant. The other thing that he has mentioned now numerous times is that we don't need to be doing things to be seen by men. You can see this a lot still in our world today. This is clearly something that they were struggling with. But you want to be noticed by other people for your good works. You want to be noticed by what clothing maybe you have on, or the place that you sit at a feast. You have to be in the front, because if you sit in the back, that might be a bad thing. When I was growing up in school, the cool kids always sat in the back of the bus. But here, I guess they're wanting to sit in the front of the bus, right? They got to be the first on, first off, right? Everyone else has to wait for them. And so they're doing all these things, and they're putting heavy burdens on folks, but they themselves will not lift a finger to it. We can read, and I mentioned it last week. I think Dell even followed up with it on Sunday morning. But all of us are leaders, and you always want to be a leader. You don't want to be a boss. If you've ever worked any job, you'd rather work for a leader and not a boss. Boss loves to tell you what to do, but they'll never do it. A leader, as your boss, will tell you what to do, and they will also do it with you if needed. And so we as Christians ought to be that way as well. Don't be telling people how they should be living their life. We should be doing it right there with them. We should be the example with them. We should be lifting one another up. We should be going through these trials and these storms together, because we're part of God's family. And so right here, we're going to start back in verse 13, because we finished right there at the beginning of 15, it ties in together. But he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." This is something that the Pharisees and the religious leaders of this time clearly had an issue with, and we can have an issue with it today if we're not careful. You can see folks have an issue with this today. They bind traditions of men against people, which is something the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all of them were doing. Um, you could just make your congregation miserable to be a part of. I guess you could also encourage people to not attend. How do people see our congregations? How do they see the congregations down in Alabama? Do they see a bunch of people that are loving and caring for one another, that take care of one another, or do they see a bunch of people that are always arguing? Right? Who wants to be a part of a congregation that all they do is argue? I don't want none of that, right? I want to be a part of a congregation that is loving and living for Christ, and we're all working together on our way home to our forever home. And so we have to make sure that we are not binding things that don't need to be bound, um, making up traditions of men that don't need to be there for people to enter into heaven. We need to be being the light to other people. And we need to make sure that we're going, and also the people that we're helping to teach and preach to and encourage are also going as well. So it says in verse 14, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, and for pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation." Where do you want to get your reward? Do you want your reward here on earth, or do you want your reward in heaven? Your reward on earth could be a whole lot of money. It could be a whole lot of fame. It could be the best seat you could ever find, and that will be all you'll get. And then when you pass away and you draw your final breath, that seat, someone else gets it. That money gets passed on to someone else. All those nice things you got rewarded, well, they ain't yours no more because you can't take them with you when you go. But if your reward is heaven, when you take your final breath, ain't no one taking that reward. Ain't no one taking it. So where do you want your reward to be? We don't need to be doing things in order to be seen by other people. If other people see it, so be it. But our intention does not need to be, we need to get recognition from other people. And if someone does see our good work and tries to build us up for it, where does the glorification need to be pointed towards? God, the kingdom, right? And building that up, right? That's who we're working for. We're not working for our own glorification, but for His. And so it continues on in verse 15, and it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves." I was talking to Dale about this before we came in. Talk about encouragement, I guess you could say, for your evangelism program that they had going on. Were they doing it the right way? Were they sowing, per se, the right seeds, or did they have ill intent and casting things or putting burdens on folks that didn't need to be put there? We've got to make sure that we are studying for our own soul and our own salvation. We also need to make sure that we are teaching, preaching the truth as well. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not, but you get on Google now, and now, I don't know if anyone's got an iPhone, but if you did the most recent update, the iPhone has like AI on everything. I can't stand it. It's messed up my whole email. I can't find any of my emails. So if y'all email me, send me a text message. You'll probably change that too. I don't know. They think I know what the AI thinks, it knows what I want. It does not, clearly. But people just trust it. People go into Google and they'll just type in what is this? What does this teach, right? They type it in, AI will pop up an answer. Are you going to trust artificial intelligence with your salvation? And I hope not. Right? So you ought to be searching. You ought to be looking for the truth. And when we teach other people, we also need to be looking and searching and preaching what the truth is. Because we do not need to be making other people more, I guess you could say, more lost. They were lost anyways. We don't need to be making it even worse. And we don't need to be making it bad for ourselves either. And then in verse 16, it really goes into it. "Woe to you, blind guides." Uh, Back when I was, say, 10, probably one of my favorite family vacations we ever went on was to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We went to the Hershey's Chocolate Factory too, but I really wanted to go. I was a nerd when I was 10. I liked history, and then I realized I was dyslexic, so I struggle a little bit with dates. It makes it hard to really enjoy history and dates. But my favorite part was we went downtown Philadelphia, and then we also went to Gettysburg. And I remember we had this little tour And back then, I want to say it was a cassette tape. It could have been a CD, but I remember you plugged it in into like the car, and it would be like when you come to the stop sign, hit next, and then you'd like it'd tell you to go right, left, or straight, or what it was, and it would talk about like what's up on the hill. Well, what if that person giving the tour was blind and they don't know a lick about what's over there on the right, or if there's even a stop sign there? You know, is that going to be a good tour? Are you going to learn anything from that? Well, if we're blind guides, we're just leading each other into destruction. And so we've got to make sure that we have eyes that see, ears that hear, and hearts that understand, and truly are seeking for the truth. So we don't need to be blind guides. And so it says, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple, he is obligated to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it, he is obligated to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift?" Was the blood of bulls and goats good enough to cleanse us of all of our sins? What if uh, what if they put me up on the cross and my blood was shed? Is that gonna get us to heaven? They've got their focus on the wrong thing. The wrong thing. It wasn't the wood that they used for Jesus that saved us. It wasn't that they used a fancier nail, or that they just had the crown right there just perfectly made. It had to be the right blood, and it had to be the right sacrifice, and it had to be from the right person to 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 complete everything that needed to be completed for us. And so here they are, they're focused, and a lot of the times what you can see with the Pharisees and Sadducees is they're focused on earthly things. They're focused on earthly attention instead of heavenly intention. They're focused on earthly rewards instead of heavenly rewards. And even the disciples struggle with some of this because, for example, when Jesus goes to tell them that we're going to have to go to Jerusalem, and all this is going to happen, and I'm going to be betrayed and crucified, on the third day I'll rise. And what Peter's like, "Not on my watch, you're not. I got you," right? And he's thinking all we have to save you physically, right? It's not about being saved physically, it's about being saved spiritually for eternity. And so they have their eyes set here on the wrong thing. They think the wrong thing is justifying them. And then verse 20 says, "Therefore, he who swears by an altar swears by it, and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it, and him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits on it." Now, if you go back further in the life of Christ, what does Jesus tell us about swearing? Let your oath be an oath, and what should your yes be? A yes, and your no should be a no. People ought to know when you say yes, you mean yes. And when you say no, you mean no. Because if they don't know that your yes means a yes and your no means a no, that means you're probably not keeping up with whatever you're saying. You're just saying yeses and you ain't fulfilling them. You're saying nos and you ain't fulfilling them. People ought to be able to trust us. People ought to be able to believe what we say and that it means something. We shouldn't have to make up all these different oaths and swear by this, that, and the other, and do all these other things to keep us to that. We should be close enough to one another. We should be looking out for one another enough. When we say yes, it means yes. And when we say no, it means no. We ought to be truth. We ought to be living for what we've committed to and what is the right thing to do. Questions, comments, thoughts, concerns over the first handful of verses? All right, we're going to continue on verse 23. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides, leaving the others undone, or blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel." I can only imagine their faces as he just continues down this tear. It's almost whenever he went into their house and he essentially just goes through the exact same rant. He's sitting there having dinner with them, and he's just giving them the truth. And so here he goes into it. He once again calls them hypocrites. And then he goes in and he's saying, you're paying attention to what? Oh, you're paying attention to the tithes. Oh, you got the tithes. Oh, you passed the collection plate every chance you get. But faith, can't find it. What else does he say? He says, faith, can't find it, right? Justice, boy, there ain't none. I ain't got no mercy for anybody. You're leaving all these things undone. Is it wrong to focus on the tithing part? No. But what also should you be doing? These other things as well. The biggest ones that we could probably, now there's a lot of misjustice in the world today. The two that I really think probably would affect congregations the most today would be the mercy and the faith. Sometimes I think it's very, very easy. It shouldn't be. Sometimes I think it's very, very easy for us to show a lack of mercy to one another. Whether someone has fallen away, decided to come back, whether someone has done something against us, we show a lack of forgiveness, whatever it may be. Sometimes we can be so slow to show mercy, yet Christ is not nearly that slow to show us mercy, is he? Right? When someone asks to be healed by Jesus, right, what does Jesus do? Does he give them like a 60-day, if you don't hurt me for the next 60 days, I'll think about it? What does he do? Your faith has made you well, and you are what? It's instant. It's not some, long drawn out process. It's an instant thing. And then you go into faith. How strong is our faith? Well, you look out the world today, and Christianity's losing. Churches, why y'all getting together? You bunch of old, crazy people believing all these other things. Don't have the truth. This, that, and the world. Boy, they got us down, cornered. We're out. No chance of survival. Is that so? It ain't so. Shouldn't be so. Satan thought he won as well. He didn't. Didn't have a chance. He thought he won when Jesus drew that final breath. He didn't. And the world hasn't won today because what are Christians when they draw that final breath? Or I guess when Jesus comes back? They're overcomers. And you can read that in 1 John. They're overcomers of this world. How strong is our faith? This world obviously is going to kick us when we're down. Brian mentioned it in the prayer. This world is crazy. Now, we can look at it in two ways. We can let that discourage us because the world is so crazy, and it is, I say it all the time, it is not the best place to be in. I'd much rather be in heaven any day to not have to deal with all this drama and all this stress of the world. But if the world is that crazy, what does that mean for Christians? That means there's a higher percent of people that we can tell about Jesus because that means there's more lost souls. The whole world's gone crazy. That means anyone you about run into, you can tell about Jesus. And so we have more and more work to do. The fields are still ripe. We have to be still continuing on. We have to have faith. Abraham is one of those that showed faith beautifully. I mean, I think I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, but he offers up Isaac, the promised son. God will provide. That was his only thought. When we get in these trials, we get in these tribulations, we get in these tough times where we're not sure how we're going to get out on the other side, God will provide. Those three words should always bring us encouragement. We shouldn't get downtrodden because God will provide. He said he would never leave us nor forsake us. And based off his track record, I think he's pretty good at keeping a promise, right? He's not a politician. He promises made, promises kept with Jesus. So he goes on and he says, these you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. So we ought to have all of these together. Verse 24, blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Love this example. This right here very easily can be us today too. We can try to fix the smallest little tiny thing. When you look over here and there's just huge problem that if we'd correct the huge problem, this one over here would probably correct itself because the huge one is fixed. It's like the Flex Seal commercials. They came out the fancy tape. You put a hole in your boat, and you're just like, I'm gonna put tape over this, and it'll float. Might just need a new boat, right? That might be the real solution because the tape is eventually going to wear off, and then you got the same problem again. And so sometimes in our life, we can keep trying to put tape over a small problem, and there can be this huge thing that we need to correct that would correct the other. But also, sometimes we can focus on the smallest things that we're missing the biggest picture. Here, they're sitting there focused on tithes and other things, but they're missing the justice, the mercy, and the faith. And so we have to be very careful with that as well. And you could even go back to Jesus talking about getting the log out of your own eye before sitting there, and essentially trying to do open heart surgery on somebody else. Let's make sure you can actually see first. And so, again, it all comes down to we have to be here for one another. And it goes on in verse 25, and it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also." I don't, I'm not going to judge anyone's cleaning habits here. But if I come over to your house for dinner and you only clean the outside of the plate and you still have the dinner from the night before on the inside part of the plate, I'm not going to be very hungry. It sounds so foolish, doesn't it? But that's what they're doing. And we can do the exact same thing. Boy, you can have on the nicest suit come Sunday. Boy, you can have the nicest car. Oh, you can look so religious. They looked real religious. But what were they missing? Faith, justice, mercy. They're putting extra things on binding other things on extra people, making it harder to get to heaven. Did they have it all going on? Boy, they look like it. They didn't. They had everyone fooled, I guess, right? But it sounds so silly. But when you think about it, if we just cleanse the inside, the fruits of the Spirit are just going to naturally take place. That's just going to be a byproduct of it. If you take care of the inside, if you dedicate your life to Christ, if you're living for Him, if you're studying your Word, you're in communication with Him through prayer and things of that nature, the fruits of the Spirit are just going to be a byproduct of that because you're living the right way for Him. It's just going to naturally take place. And these things that we talked about earlier, straining the gnat, swallow a camel. When you start living for Christ, when you start focusing on the bigger picture, a lot of those things are just going to start to go away. Now, is the world going to instantly try to come back and kick you when you think you're doing pretty good? Absolutely. And that's why we have to continue to have the faith portion of it. Um, but let's make sure that we're not focused on what the outside or the outward appearance is when the inside could be filthy as could be. Because what truly corrupts us? What flows from the heart. You can eat all kinds of nasty things, and I might even judge you for what you eat. I might think what you're eating, or maybe what you made. Maybe I'm like, that don't look too good. That's not going to be what corrupts me, right? What's going to corrupt me is what's flowing out of my heart. And what is flowing out of our hearts? It should always be a question. Is it love? Is it forgiveness? Is it mercy? Is it encouragement for one another? What is it? Or is it deceit, jealousy, self-indulgence, um, extortion? I mean, what's flowing out of our heart? And then verse 28, oh, never mind, I skipped that. Verse 27, it continues on. It says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear to be beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead man's bones and all uncleanliness." Outwardly looks great. Inwardly, not so much. Even so, it says in verse 28, even so you also outwardly appear righteous to men. So you appear it, but inside you are what? Full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. You can fool every single person in your congregation every single Sunday and Wednesday when you're sitting in that pew. The one person you will never fool is Jesus. You can fool your way through life. You can trick people all the way through life. You can deceive everybody. But when it comes judgment day, you ain't fooling him. So you can think you're doing good. You can think that, well, people think I'm good. People think this and people think that. What is God going to think? What is the judgment from God going to be? Be honest with you, you can have me fooled. You could have me fooled for 20 years. But on the 21st year, if you're like, hey, I've actually not been who I've said I've been, I would rather that be the outcome so that you could inherit heaven and you get your life on track than you just continue to fake it so that I don't become upset or something of that because you've now lied to me for all these years. I would rather your soul be right and me be upset because I feel like I've been lied to, and then both of us go to heaven, than you be worried about my feelings. Let's make sure we all get to heaven. So there's no reason to fake it because he is going to know. So he is the God that knows secret. It says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not be partakers with them in the blood of the prophets." This right here should be for us today. I've probably fallen into this trap quite a bit, but I sit there and you go back and you read, say, Exodus. Well, you cross the river, and then you get a couple chapters further, and you're like, did they just forget what just happened just right before this? How did they do that? Then you look at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they're like, how could they not see the power of Jesus? How are they missing this? It could so easily be us. It's so easy for us to go back, and hindsight's 2020. I never would have forgot after they parted the sea and we crossed it, crushed all the Egyptians. I wouldn't forget. And then you're sitting there wandering the wilderness, and you might just forget if you take your eyes off what the prize is. Uh, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I know we've mentioned this in class before. I know Dale's mentioned it as well. Some of these folks have probably been in Jewish faith for years, years. And now here comes Jesus, and he's uprooting what you've become so accustomed to. And you're having to make wholesale changes, essentially. It's harder than what we think it is. And it's harder for people that have a lot of issues in the world today to change all those than we want to think it is. Um, it ought to be easy to give your life to Christ and accept the blessings and everything for it. But that's a big thing for some people. And that's where encouragement once again comes in and love once again comes in. And so they say here in verse 30, it so easily could be us. They say, well, if we would have lived in those days, we would have never been partakers. We would have never killed the prophets. They might just be about to do something a little bit worse than that, mightn't they? Here in just a couple of days, they might be killing the Son of God. You have to think about this. They've already gone after John the Baptist, right? They've already taken him out years before, beheaded him, brought his head on a platter. But they say, we wouldn't do this. We would notice. We wouldn't attack like this. Again, we have to keep ourselves humble and in perspective. Um, I would always love to know what the Bible would be if it was like an our time stamp right now. You know, what woes would Jesus be giving us if he was here tonight? What woes would he be giving our congregations? You look at the beginning of Revelation, and they start writing the letters um, to the churches. What is our congregation going to be found? What's going to be said about our congregation? It's always good to self-evaluate. It's always good to look at those things. And it says in verse 31, it continues on. I'm going to go back up to verse 30. I skipped it. No, I didn't. Verse 31. Therefore, you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murder the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpent, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? How can you escape it? Once you're there, you can't. How can you escape it if you're still on earth? The blood of Christ. Said this numerous times. Who was hell made for? Devil and his angels. And what was made for God's creation? Heaven. So what was made for us? Heaven. Where do you think he wants you to be? Heaven. Does he want anyone to go to the place that wasn't made for him? No. Are some going to end up there? Yeah, unfortunately. It's awful. It's sad. It ought to break our heart. Um, it's a terrible thing. Verse 34, therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in the synagogues and persecute from city to city. They did this before Jesus. They're going to do this to Jesus. And they're going to do what after Jesus? The same thing. Could this happen today as well? Well, we get really upset when someone says something mean. They say something mean about us. Now go through this. Go through what the early church went through. Would you like to be crucified, burned at the stake, um, just killed if you even attend church? The persecution would be so much greater. Um, this is what they did before, during Jesus' life, and this is what they do after. And it very well could come back to us today. So you got something?
You know, the Hebrew writer talks about this to the Hebrew people, but to us in Hebrews 2 and verse 3, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? In the passage, the first passage, verse 1, you know, it says, lest you drift away. We can drift away just like they drifted away. And sometimes we see the church drifting.
Yeah. And sometimes you can see it drifting, and you think, well, it'll get back corrected. Or you see yourself drifting. I'll get back there. But you don't stop the drift, and the drift just kind of keeps happening. And then you look back up and you're like, I can't even see land anymore. How did I get in this position? When we see something drifting, stop what you're doing and stop the drifting. Don't allow it to drift. Why would you want to drift any further? And when you think about neglecting such a great salvation, I don't know if we take that seriously enough today. Such a great salvation. And then Jesus mentioned this earlier in his life, probably about a month before this. Now, I guess he mentioned it too here in the final week too. He mentioned it again. But people will make excuses for this. They'll make excuses for that. They'll neglect this. They'll neglect that because they're looking at earthly. We're not running a short race. We're not sprinters. We're long distance runners. This is a marathon. I don't care how fast your 100-meter dash is, unless you can keep that for a full marathon, then you've got me beat by all means. But you can run that race real quick, and then you lose sight of the fact that we got to keep going. We haven't made it to the finish line yet. We're looking for the long-term prize, not the short-term prize.
When we run that 100-yard dash, we sit down and rest.
That's right.
When we run that marathon, we keep going.
Yeah, that's the key. And the whole part too. You think about a marathon. I've not done one. I can watch people do them. There's some trials inside that marathon. Every mile is not that easy. Um, And so there's going to be some parts where you're going to want to give up. There's going to be some parts where it's easy to give up. It would make sense in the world's eyes to give up and give in. God will provide. That he will always do. So it goes on, it says, so you're going to let's see, and persecute from the city, verse 35, that on you come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Barakah, whom you murder between the temple and the altar. Surely I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. It's coming a little bit quicker than what they probably think it is, isn't it? Here soon, they're going to have Jesus in trials. There's false witnesses making up all these claims, wanting to wanting Barabbas out of jail so they can crucify Jesus. The blood is going to be on their hands, squarely on their hands. And then when you flip over to Acts 1, Acts 2, you start to see that first sermon preached. And they come to the conclusion, realization that what Jesus said right here was exactly right. They were just like their forefathers. They persecuted and murdered, spat upon, beat the Son of God.
Stephen said to the crowd that rushed upon him, "Here's like your ancestors, you're like your fathers."
Yeah. And what's insane about Stephen, I always think about that. Who was there with Stephen? I wonder what that conversation is going to be like in heaven one day.
Facebook has a lot of good stuff it does. It has certainly bad, but there's one that some put on seldom and talk about Paul and Stephen meeting in heaven. And it's just a little, let's call it a meme or just a little picture, but boy, it's got some great work. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? That's forgiveness. that's joy and glad.
Yeah. Because you got to think when they make the realization for the first time, in the world's eyes, Stephen's reaction should be, get that guy out of here. He don't belong up here. In a Christian's eyes, it ought to have been like, I'm so glad you made it. Thanks for helping me get here quicker, I guess, right? But I'm so glad you made it. The same thing if someone persecutes us and all of a sudden they walk into our church building, will you come sit next to me? So glad you made it. We shouldn't want anyone to perish. I don't care how bad the person is. You never want someone to die twice. You don't want the physical death, and we most definitely don't want the spiritual death. We ought to want every. Hell is that terrible. Why should any? I don't care how bad their life is, how bad they've been on earth. We shouldn't want anyone to inherit that. Verse 37. This is where we'll kind of start to wrap up this evening. But it says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her." They won't listen. You go back to the vine dresser that Jesus mentioned before. He sends some servants, beat them, kill them. Sends some more servants, beat them, kill them. Well, I'll send the Son. Surely they'll listen to the Son. And then what? They're like, now we can take possession because the Son is supposed to inherit it all. So we'll kill him too. All along, there was a blessing that was right there before them, a truth that was right there before them. They're not listening. We have to make sure we're listening. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. How willing do you think Jesus is to gather all of us today? Every single soul. So willing that he put his life on the line for it, didn't he? So willing that he died for it. But it's the last couple words. But you were not willing. You can want to be healed, but are you going to allow it to happen? Some people like to just be, I guess, just like to be stuck in misery. I don't know. They just like to be stuck in ruts. They just like to be negative. They just like to look for the worst thing possible. Jesus wants to gather all of the children together. Some are not going to be willing. They were not willing. Are we willing in our lives today? We can't neglect such a great salvation. We most certainly don't want to miss such a great salvation. And we most definitely want to be gathered in that family. And it says in verse 38, see, your house is left to your desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Your house is going to be left empty. Everything here on earth is going to be left empty, gone one day.
I know you'll get to it in your classes, but when you get to 24, then he shows them the destruction.
Yeah.
And they didn't get it all.
They didn't get it. And you have to think up until this point, the disciples or the apostles and the disciples are still missing it. His own family is still missing it. He goes through all these woes. How many of these woes fit into us today? How many of these woes fit into our life today? When you start looking at them, you go back into verse 3 of chapter 23. It says, therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. Are we in the lip service business and we say a whole bunch of things and it's do as I say, not as I do? Or are we living out what Christ has commanded us to live? Verse 5, but all their works they do to be seen by men. Are we in the business of just being seen by men? Or are we in the business of working for the glorification of the Father, working for the kingdom? Verse 11, but he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That one gets a little bit hard sometimes, don't it? And whoever exalts himself will be what? Humbled. And he who humbles himself will be exalted. Which would you rather be? I think I'll take the latter. I think I'd rather humble myself now, remain humble now, so that I can be exalted later, than be exalted now by people in this world and be humble later. You go into verse 13 through 14. They're shutting up the kingdom of heaven against people. They're not even going in. Verse 15. They're searching after people, trying to win people over, but they're doing what? They're making them twice as much a son of hell as themselves. So now they're just spreading it. Verse 16, now we have a reference again about blind guides. They have their focus on what is the wrong thing. Verse 23, they're paying attention to the tithes. Oh, they're passing the basket, but they're missing what? Justice, mercy, and faith. We have to make sure that's in our congregations today. Verse 25, they like to eat with dirty plates. They got last night's food still on it, but the outside's clean as a whistle. It's like when you get into someone's car and they just took it through a car wash. It looks so nice, and then you open up the passenger door, and then like 30 things fall out, and they're like, "Hold on, let me just move it," and they just put it in the back seat, and then you're still just stepping on everything. It ain't clean. I'd rather the outside have some mud and me be able to have a place to sit. Verse 27, they're appearing outwardly righteous to men, but on the inside they are what? Full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. It don't matter how clean you are on the outside. Same thing in verse 29 and verse 30. It doesn't matter if we are appearing that way on the outside. We have to be clean on the inside. Verse 31 and on. Boy, we would never be like that. I know that happened to you. Your faith is just too weak. That would never happen to me. I would never fall for that. We have to remain humble. Have to remain humble. We have to be encouraging one another as well. Then you go down into the end that we just finished in verse 37 through verse 39. Jesus is willing. He's always willing until that final day. But are you willing? And that's the key to it. Christ has already made a way. He has already shown that he is willing. He has already made promises and kept promises, and he will keep the last great and final promise. But are you willing? Are you willing to die to self and live for him? Are you willing to pick up and carry the cross? Are you willing to speak up when the world wants us to remain quiet? That's something that the apostles had to deal with right there at the beginning of Acts. We'll put you in jail. They just instantly stopped talking. They kept going. Well, they stoned Paul. They thought he was dead, left him for dead, threw him out of the city, right? Guys, stoned him outside the city, leave him out there. Does he just stop talking after that? He don't want to get killed, right? He gets right on up and he does what? Right back to it. So are you willing this evening is the question. Are we willing to fully give our life to Christ? Are we willing to fully turn over all of the burdens of this life to Christ because his yoke is what? Easy to bear. Life ain't easy. Life is hard. But what is impossible with men is what? Impossible with men is what? Possible. It's getting almost 8 o'clock. It's almost bedtime, right? It's possible with God. So what seems impossible in our mind, what seems that there's no way overcome it, like a hurdle. I'm not a track person. Uh, I'm not fast at all. I'm really not fast now. Every day I think I get slower probably. And I couldn't jump and clear a hurdle to save my life. And the hurdle of overcoming the world seems impossible in man's eyes. But with God and his blood, it can become no problem at all.
We was talking about faith earlier. John says in First John, we overcome the world through faith or by faith.
Yep. And so if we are willing, right there in 1 John 5, we will be overcomers of this world. So I don't know what you might have going on. I know we have CYC in this weekend, and there's going to be kids that are dealing with all kinds of things that we cannot place ourselves in those shoes no matter how much we want to. There's going to be things that they see in their household, things that they see at school, things that they see with friends, and this, that, and the other that is going to be a hindrance to them. We have to be willing to share the gospel with anybody and every single person because Christ was willing to share his blood, sacrifice his blood for us, and willing to share heaven with us for just a little while, right? A little while that's called eternity. And that's what we have to look forward to after we leave this earth. So if you have anything that needs prayers, anything that you feel like you're not willing enough to give over to Christ, do it while the day, I guess, is still young, right? There's no reason to leave here and still be carrying burdens when you can hand them over to Christ. There's no reason to leave here and carry any of those things with you when Christ can set you completely free. So always be willing because he is willing. Mark, do you have an invitation song? Perfect. Mark's going to lead us the invitation, but if you have anything, please just come forward and let's pray together and let's encourage one another. Thank you.